Welcome to Shine Me a Light podcasts. In this series, the last 27 years, in each episode we're going through the last 27 years in the life of one class of 95 Sydney Girls High School student, and this episode is Shelley Grainger. This has been really fun. So far it's been really fun. Some of them I've been going face to face and doing them, and then since doing them on Riverside, it's been just as much sort of fun. And I think to me, I said to someone the other day, in 27 more years, we'll be in our 70s.
That's very scary.
So it's so it's been such a long period of time.
I know. I mean, it feels like a lifetime ago since we were at school, but not that long.
I know.
27 years.
Some memories I can remember yesterday,
yeah.
And then other things feel like they were so long ago. What are some of the memories that you have of those years, 90 to 95?
Oh, well, that's interesting for me. I definitely remember the intense pressure, of school, because my dad in particular had high expectations, and he was constantly like, "What are you doing? How are you doing? Where are you ranking? What mark are you getting?" He was the sort of person who told me what I was going to be when I grew up when I was 7. I found this diary in year 12 from year 3 where I announced to my friends that I was going to be a chartered accountant when I grew up. And I obviously had no idea what that meant.
Yeah.
But that was the plan that was set for me. And I guess for me, all the way through high school, the pressure was, what are you going to do to achieve that? Today, tomorrow, the next day. In year 10, I was out doing work experience with Ernst & Young, getting ready to prepare for my, cadetship, which I did.
And are you a chartered accountant today?
No, definitely not. It was absolutely not the right choice for me. And it took me a while to get my head around that, because it had been the plan for so long, and to let go of that and actually step back and think about what I wanted to do with my life.
Do you remember anything from year 7?
Not really. School camp.
Do you remember school camp? Okay, what do you remember of school camp?
The food. I remember the talent quest that we had.
Yes.
Do you remember that? I don't know which night. I don't know how many nights we were there for.
Because I sang with a broken arm.
Oh, well, that was very impressive. I sang with someone else, but I remember Grace Kim and her phenomenal piano playing.
Blown away.
Yep.
I know.
I'm thinking, wow.
Yeah, I know. And I played piano at the time, and I remember going, I don't think I actually do play piano.
Yeah, me too.
It was amazing, isn't it? All right. So when you do HSC in 95?
Yes, I did.
All right. So when you left school at the end of 95, where did you go in 96?
So I went to uni, but only part-time, because I did take up that cadetship with Price Waterhouse that I'd worked towards. And that was it was a really good experience, because I went from being in high school to suddenly being thrown into this business world full of, grown-ups in suits and, real work and Friday night free drinks. That was very exciting
too, and it was weird. Yeah,
really weird, but very exciting, and a bit overwhelming, because my first project. When I joined there, I was put on a rotation program where you work in different parts of the company, and my first posting was in liquidation. And they decided it would be a good experience for me to be involved in the liquidation of a wheel rim manufacturer out west that was being wound up by PwC after being in the family for 3 generations.
Oh, how tragic.
And they got so busy with other things that they decided to send out me, Shelley Coleman at the time, at age 18 and very green, out to the wheel rim manufacturer to pay the wages every week, take the car keys off the owners, basically help with that wind up process and handing the assets back. And so, that was definitely an induction by fire.
At the deep end, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But there was, lots of other good aspects about it. And, it was really social. I was amazed by all the very cool growing up men who I met there. And just working with lots of different companies and seeing how they work. It was really interesting. I knew pretty quickly that accounting was dry, boring, and too structured for me. But just learning about business and earning money and dressing up in suits, meeting people was really exciting.
Sometimes I think I should have just done accounting.
Yeah, absolutely. I was lucky, because I don't know about you, I was still at home, so I could kind of make that work. But I had friends there who had left their homes, come from the country or wherever to be in the city.
Rent.
Yeah, paying real rent, going to uni, trying to live the uni life. and buy suits and stuff on like $16,000 a year. It was pretty impossible.
I was in the same suit very often. You know, I changed the top. Wear the same pants all week, you know?
Yeah. Well, I remember getting a shock because we were on one particular case, and it was obviously a client that had lots of money and were willing to spend whatever it took. And I remember being told by the manager, like, you just charge like whatever you want to this case. Like, even if you think about this client in your sleep, you put that time down on your timesheet. Like, we can charge whatever we want. And that was quite a shock to me, and like it was to you, and felt, you know, very uncomfortable. But it was hard to know what to do when I was so, you know, young and new.
So young, that's right. And you're still working out your own ethics, and people who are much more experienced are telling you this is how it works, this is what you do. And yeah, that balance, it's scary when you're young. And we thought, I don't know about you, but I thought I was so mature, if you know what I mean. At 18, 19,
absolutely. Going from like school to this, you're like, wow, I've really grown up.
I'm such an adult. I have a 19-year-old son now, and I look at him and go, you know, you're such a boy. You know, but at 19, I felt so, I don't know, just like I knew it all. But anyway, okay, so how long did it last at Waterhouse?
Well, the cadetship was structured into 2 years of full-time work and nighttime uni. And then I had the chance to go back and finish my degree full-time.
Yep.
And just work with, I was doing commerce. That's what you have to do a cadetship.
Yep.
And in those second 2 years, I ended up like setting up my own accounting business with their small clients, because they used to have lots of small businesses and then realized that they weren't the target audience anymore. I guess they didn't have enough to pay. And so they started looking for some of the trainees to look after their books. And that worked really well for me because I had my own little car and computer, and I just turn up to these clients and do their books. And you know, I was being paid, I think, between $35 and $50 an hour at the time, which was, you know, much more than PwC were paying me. So that was, you know, exciting. And commerce was pretty boring, pretty dry. And like, it was a course I felt that you could get away with doing the bare minimum to get like through and get good marks. It wasn't, you know, intellectually intense like engineering or something else. So I ended up basically working full time and then just fitting in the full time uni around that. So,
and I suppose it would have taught you a lot about the finances of running a small business.
Yeah, it did.
I'm making that assumption, but yeah.
Yeah, and that experience was really good because I was working side by side with small business owners, rather than, and, you know, they trusted me and I was working within their business, whereas at PwC, you're very much like, you know, you're the service provider and they're the client. Separate. And especially when you're the auditor, there's, a certain amount of distrust and distance. And so you never really feel a part of the team.
Yeah.
So when I had my little business, that was really good. And it definitely ignited a passion in me to have my own business one day.
Yep.
And work with other small businesses, which I ended up doing a long time down the track.
I'm very excited to hear about your small businesses later on. Okay, so this is taking you, I'm assuming, around to 2000-ish?
Yeah, I think it took 4.5 years. So I graduated in mid-2000. Yeah.
Yeah, ish 2000.
Yeah. I think after I had graduated and then we had the Olympics.
Which was
very fun.
Which everyone can remember where they were for the opening ceremony, and that little girl, what was her name? I can't remember.
Nikki Webster.
Nikki Webster, yes, I can still see her. Okay.
Very brave.
All right, so what happened after 2000?
Well, I ended up joining a management consulting firm called Boston Consulting Group. So I knew my passions weren't in accounting or auditing, but I was still really interested in business and wanted to learn more about how people think about the strategy of business.
Yeah.
So towards the end of uni, I learned about these management consulting firms and got really interested in what they were up to, and applied to BCG and joined just after the Olympics, actually, and worked there for the next 4 years.
Okay.
So that was more about working with big companies on their future business strategy. So, for example, we were working with Qantas, and they were thinking about launching another international airline. It was Australian Airlines at the time. It was based out of Cairns and servicing Asia, to, I guess, enable all that interest that, you know, Asian people had in visiting Cairns and North Queensland.
Yeah.
It's just a funny coincidence because I live here now and very passionate about tourism up here. But, you know, those are the sort of things that we worked on, like thinking about which direction the business should go in, like, you know, thinking about major change initiatives. Yeah, I found that really, it's interesting, right?
Like a creative part of of a business degree.
It was good to understand because it meant that, like, I guess when I was looking at the financials of a company, that like that experience gave me the ability to understand it.
And and whether a strategy is possible relies on the finances and all the
exactly.
logistics.
Doing the economic model to verify and validate what you're thinking.
Yeah.
But it was much more interesting. Definitely very intense though. I don't know if you've come across other people who've worked in that industry, but you definitely they definitely get their money's worth.
Well, there's a lot of responsibility, isn't
absolutely.
there?
And the company is paying big dollars to companies like BCG to help with those kind of decisions. So
especially with like a blue ocean strategy, where you're really trying to sell it to them, and they're trusting in you. And
something
it doesn't work.
That's not good. So as a result, they pay big fees. They're very big decisions. They want to make them quickly. There's obviously a lot of pressure on the team. So I remember on one case down in Melbourne, I think the earliest we left the office in 6 months was at about, I don't know, midnight. So it was an intense time, but I just learned so much. And you work with so many different companies, so many different people.
And pressure sounds like was normal for you.
I think so. So probably that pressure at home prepared me well.
Yeah.
I was also not very organised in terms of study, even at school. Like, I would do everything at the last minute. All my assignments were done the night before, like in the middle of the night. I'd always cram for exams. And although at the time that was probably pretty stressful, it prepared me for that because it didn't affect me as much as it did others, like being under so much pressure and doing such long hours.
Yeah.
So, that's at least what I tell my family.
That's some good that came out of it. Yeah. Thanks, Dad.
Well, my mum too, because my mum's the complete opposite, and she spent the entire high school trying to convince me to like adopt her ways of like starting everything the moment you get it and like slowly and methodically working through it. And I just couldn't. I thrive on the pressure.
I don't know that's anyone.
What gets happening.
Like, it's so right in theory, but I don't know if anyone's ever been able to convince anyone to actually do it. Like,
the slow methodical.
Yeah, when as you get it, make your little scaffold, and then make your plan for what you're going to do, and do a little bit as you go, so that there's no big pressure at the end. Like, it makes so much logical sense. But I mean, I've worked as a tutor. I'm a mother. I don't think I've ever been able to actually get anyone to implement it. And you know what I mean? Like,
absolutely,
it just doesn't happen in practice very often. People who do it, hats off, because they're smashing
absolutely. Yeah, that definitely wasn't me, and so I guess this environment was suited to me for the time. So it was 4 years that I worked there for.
That's intense. And had you met your partner at that time? Was there any stuff going on in other parts of your life?
Actually, it was a big point of change in my life. So when I was at PwC, I did meet a guy who I was really serious with. We were together for about 5 years, and he was probably similar to me. We were both really ambitious about, our careers and really focused. He joined Goldman Sachs. I joined BCG. So we just lived this really intense, work-focused, but, highly social lifestyle together.
Yep.
It didn't leave very much time for our relationship. Yeah. And I think he was okay with that. He was someone who didn't need emotional connection. Yeah. I really did, and I ended up feeling very kind of lonely in that relationship. Even though I really cared for him and loved him, I was just lonely, and my soul was definitely craving more. And a couple of years into my time at BCG, they were looking for volunteers to go up to Cairns to work with the local Indigenous leaders there, Noel Pearson and Gerhard Pearson, who at the time were kind of leading the charge on empowering Indigenous people to, develop, real economic and sustainable growth in their areas of passion.
Yeah.
And BCG had gotten right behind that, and they were sending people up for 3 months at a time to work on various business projects. And I was always interested in understanding Indigenous Australia, but it wasn't a particular passion. But when this came up, something inside me just said, you have to go. You need to be there. You have to go. And I put my hand up, and at the time I was supposed to go on a different case, and they're like, no, you're assigned to this, you can go some other time. And I was like, no, I have to do this. And I fought really hard, and I didn't actually know why. It was just something inside me that was driving me. And eventually they gave in and let me go. And on the first day that I arrived, I met my husband, who's the man who's now my husband. And it was a very surreal experience. I got to the airport, and no one was there to meet me, and they hadn't provided any details. And I was like, okay, what do I do? And I knew of a lady from our Melbourne office who'd been there previously. I'd never met her, but I just thought I'll give her a call and find out what to do, where to go. And she's like, I know this guy, this really great guy. He's called Daniel Grainger, and I'm going to give him a call and let him know that you're there, and he'll sort everything out. And that man is now my husband.
Wow.
I didn't actually meet him in that moment, because the person who was supposed to pick me up came along and took me to the office. But later that afternoon, I was being introduced to all the different people who work there, and I walked into the room where he was. He was managing a project for this organization, and as soon as I saw him, I felt like I'd found, I'd found him. That I was just like, oh, you're here. It's you. Oh my gosh, here you are.
It's an amazing feeling, that one, isn't it? Yeah, it's unexplainable, and it feels like there's no coincidences in those moments.
No,
everything's happening for a reason. I feel like I have total faith in the universe in those moments. I'm like, everything that got me here, I'm not, I love those.
It felt exactly like that. In fact, a couple of weeks before I left, I went to out with my sister for a picnic, and she's like, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how to explain this feeling, but I just feel like everything is about to change for you. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she's like, I don't know. Let's just see what happens. And that was that moment.
Has your sister got good intuition on?
Yes.
Is that what part of her account? Yeah.
Yeah, she's very intuitive, and I'd felt that drive to go up there. And in that moment, I'm like, I've found you. And luckily, he felt the same way.
Yes.
And we spoke, and then he called me up not long after, and he's like, would you like to come to dinner? And I was like, I want to. But I'd committed to someone else, and I told him where I was going, and he was supposed to be going out with his team for dinner, and he redirected them to where we were. And we sat down together at dinner, and the rest is kind of history for us. When we started talking, it was just like we'd always known each other. And in my life, having been exposed to, I guess, a certain type of person in the corporate world, he was like an absolute breath of fresh air, like completely authentic, completely genuine, himself,
Lovely. And what a beautiful story for your children. I just have to comment that's such a beautiful, if that was your parents' story.
Our son, PJ loves it. He tells people about it. And he was only born 6 years ago, and we went through quite a journey to have him, but he loves to think of the fact that he was there for this whole ride, being an egg in my belly. Because and he tells everyone that he was there at that moment, and he was there at our wedding, and on our journey, even though
very funny, isn't it? They're very cute. So this 6-year-old, you had children in 2016. Your son in 2016. So that's quite a period of time. So can I ask what your struggles were?
No worries. I'm totally comfortable with it. So I have polycystic ovary syndrome.
Oh, painful.
I mean, lots of people do. And so it was something that plagued me right through high school, because, back in those days, no one knew what it was, and no one knew how to treat it. And I went to tons of specialists during high school trying to get help, because I went through periods of having absolutely nothing going on, and then being flooded with menstruation for weeks on end. I actually remember my first work experience placement, that I was referring to before, was at Ernst & Young, and I was 16, and I was so nervous but so excited to be there. And it was during those that heavy phase, where I just bled like crazy for the entire week, and it was just so awkward, trying to come to terms with that, and trying to manage that, being at clients for the first time, and trying to impress them so that they would consider me for a cadetship. But that's just that's just
so emotionally overwhelming for a 16-year-old.
It was well, it wasn't easy, and they experimented with all these different pills on me, and I remember just feeling completely different people, and totally emotionally overwhelmed and wrecked and not knowing what was happening, and they just didn't know what to do with it at the time.
Horrible.
Absolutely.
So when did you eventually get a diagnosis?
I did in my teens, but they basically just said, this is what you have to live with it. Like there was no way to manage it at the time, or no cure.
Yeah.
And so after seeing a bunch of other specialists and seeing if there were other ways to deal with it during uni, I just accepted it for what it was and just kind of lived with it. It wasn't as crazy as it was in high school, like going forward, like with these like hugely heavy, crampy, like cloddy cycles. But it definitely, like, I'd go through such like periods of, you know, really high energy and like feeling really, you know, strong, and on top of it to like completely crashing and, you know, trying to kind of keep it all together and work in a male-dominated corporate world and pretend that everything was okay wasn't
where
easy.
Menstrual issues are not going to be accepted well is the reason.
No, absolutely. So yeah, and I just kind of muddled through it as best I could, because the other part of it that is also uncomfortable is, you know, the unwanted hair growth that you get in places that you really don't want, and, you know, abdominal weight gain, and those were things that affected me. And obviously as a young teenager, it was really awkward and embarrassing. And
I remember the intensity of that young. You just want to be perfect. You just want to be normal, and you just
anything different from normal is really you know, really tough. So I mean, there are much worse issues out there. So I'm not like feeling sorry for myself.
But when you're going through it,
it is hard. Yeah. Especially when, you know, you get interested in boys and you're trying to make relationships, and you just get so self-conscious about your body and exposing it. So, you know, that was a thing. But thank gosh for like laser therapy and all of that. But, you know, then I kind of worked through it until it came time for Dan and I, so my husband Dan, thinking about children. We like went back to revisit the whole fertility issue. After we met, he ended up leaving Cairns and coming with me to Sydney. I hadn't been at BCG for that long, and I was still like really in the midst of my career, and he'd been managing this project where he was rolling out a digital network throughout the Cape.
Oh, wow.
He's an Indigenous man from Cape York, and also from the Torres Strait. And, you know, as an engineer, he recognised the opportunity to provide access to like internet services in the Cape as an awesome way to access education, access entertainment, like improved connectivity. The Cape is flooded for at least 4 or 5 months of the year, and people are completely cut off from family, and like that loss of connectivity is one of the big reasons for a lot of deaths in custody in that part of the world. And by bringing in this digital network and having a little internet cafe in each community, that helped families keep connected with families in other communities, or, you know, incarcerated in Cairns or wherever. So it was a really big project, and I helped with the business case for that. That's what we worked on. But when we met, he was sort of nearing the end of his time, and he came with me to Sydney, which was a massive change for him and for me. And then we moved to Melbourne, where he did an MBA, and then Brisbane. You know, so we moved all over the place, and because we were kind of trying to figure out where we belong together. You know, he was born on Thursday Island. He grew up in the Atherton Tablelands outside Cairns. He'd spent some time in the city because he did his degree in Brisbane, but he was definitely a country person, and I grew up very much a city person. So just figuring out where we belong together took quite a while, and just sort of living in each other's worlds, and for Dan figuring out what he was going to do post this work he was doing in the Cape, and for me finding where I fit as well, because as much as I loved BCG and the experience, I got to the point where it was actually, it wasn't a sustainable lifestyle in the long term to be working like 16, 17 hours a day, and didn't lend itself 100%. To a good relationship. But B, they're really involved in strategy development, but not in the actual implementation. And you'd be part of this team that coming up with something that you're really passionate about, and then you handed it off to someone else and never saw it again.
And they never you didn't know what happened the way you had,
and then that's going to implement it the same way. You don't get to help or see it through, and that got frustrating for me.
Yeah.
And so I ended up leaving and took up a couple of roles, including going back to Cairns again to run that Aboriginal organisation where I could actually develop and implement strategies. So I could see the change through.
Yeah.
And we did that together.
And what a beautiful process to go through together and to be sure of each other and just having to work out the details. Where are we going to live together that's going to work for us and what's going to be the jobs? And I like the process. It was in hindsight hearing about it. I'm sure at the time probably was frustrating.
We were just kind of like, we need to find, like, we know we want to be together. We know we're really different and we know we come from different places and we've just got to keep trying until we find what fits. And we've now been in Townsville, of all places. Neither of us ever expected to be here, to be honest, either of us. But this is where we are, and this is where we've been for 10 years now. And it's, it feels really good to us. It feels right, at least for now.
You had a business together. Is this correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Dan, so he ended up, he taught maths and science first, but he ended up doing his PhD in economics and works at the uni, but he was still very much involved in this business.
Yep.
It's called Nourishing Bites, and we create treats that are really tasty. That's number one non-negotiable, but also really good for your body as well.
Yeah.
So they're gluten-free, dairy-free, refined sugar-free, and made from the highest quality ingredients that we can find. And the reason why we started this was actually that journey that we went through to have our son.
Yes.
So I mentioned before that the fertility came back on the radar when we were had got further down the track.
Yep.
And I was told at the time in my late 20s that I basically had zero hope of conceiving naturally, that I needed to jump on hormone therapy straight away and probably enroll in IVF straight away. And although we weren't adverse to that, we didn't want that to be the starting point.
The only solution, yeah.
Just to start there. And, the specialist was just like, just forget it, Shelley. You haven't had a regular period all this time. Like, just forget it. Just get onto this track. And we were both like, no, this doesn't feel right. And that's when we started to really look at our bodies and our lifestyle and look at the connection between PCOS and what I was eating,
nutrition,
and how we were living. And, if that occurred over many years, but I slowly, understood the connection with refined sugar, PCOS being an insulin-resistant condition. So I dropped the refined sugar, and that definitely helped my moods and general levels of energy, but it didn't give me a regular cycle. So I haven't, at this point at 30, I'd never had a regular cycle in my life. Like, it was always haphazard. So that was what I wanted to get sorted. And then I started to understand the connection between PCOS and inflammation. So that's when I dropped the gluten and the dairy and the grains for a period of time.
Inflammation is connected to so much.
It is, isn't it?
Your body's in a state of constant inflammation. There's multiple. I've had to go on this journey myself too, to solve health problems with nutrition, and just getting your body out of that state of inflammation and knowing what's causing it. And our standard diet, everyone is walking around in this inflammatory state,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because lots of people say to me, I don't know why I'd ever cut out gluten. Like, my gut's fine. But then they're like complaining of, acne or eczema or this or that. I'm like, inflammation can show up in a lot of ways. Physically, in your mental state, like in all different ways. And I found that when I cut them out, for me, that my body changed completely. And I went from being someone who'd never had a regular cycle to being like clockwork for the first time in my entire life. It was a miracle for me, because this was, a 20-year journey.
The answers are never what you expect, are they? Townsville and gluten.
Exactly. Why didn't someone tell me earlier? And it was a change in lifestyle too, because, I'd always had pretty stressful jobs with long hours, and, they were the complete focus. And there was always a lot of pressure, and it turns out, it wasn't that great for me either.
Yeah.
So we were so fortunate to then conceive our little boy naturally within 3 months. On my husband's 42nd birthday, we found out he's 5 years older than me, and it was just the hugest blessing.
So
And
beautiful.
he's been with us for 6 years now. Or
Not in
six and a
his
half,
mind.
he
He's
tells
been with
me.
you forever in his
Yeah,
mind.
that's right. Well, it feels like, as
Oh,
you would agree, it feels like he's
yeah.
been with us forever now.
Yeah. You
And
know them.
he's our little miracle, and the reason why we started the business that we started, because I've always been a chocoholic, and the idea when I made all these changes of giving up chocolate was, it was just traumatic even considering it. So I
Yeah.
decided, because this was in, '08, '08, '09 when I started with cutting out sugar, so that meant no normal chocolate.
Normal chocolate that you buy,
Um,
yeah.
and there weren't many options around then. Like today, we're blessed with so
Yes.
many options to choose from.
Things have changed a lot, haven't they? Even in the last
Abso-
5 years, there's just a lot more
absolutely,
options. Yeah.
and which is great for other people, like
Yeah.
looking at diet for their various issues.
Yeah.
And so I was like, right, well, I'm just going to have to create them for myself. And
Woohoo.
so I set about experimenting. I was working for Woolies at the time. I set up their strategy function, and I was rushing home. I found myself rushing home from my full-time paid job to create these treats at night that
Try
I
a new
could then,
recipe.
try new things, take them into the office, get everyone's feedback. And I'm like, this has got to be telling me something, because this is what I'm rushing home for. And this is what I'm thinking about all the time. This is what I'm doing
Yeah.
on the weekends. And so I kept doing it. And it wasn't long after that we made the move to come up to Townsville, and I left Woolies. And, it was a big shock at the time. There was nothing here at all in the healthy area, and also there
Yeah.
wasn't the kind of job that I used to do. So it was
Yeah.
an opportunity to completely rethink everything. And I knew that I was really passionate about this way of eating and helping others who
Yeah.
were looking to change their diet. I knew that I'd always wanted to have my own small business, from those early days and
Yeah.
from being a kid and like loving the cake stalls and all the things that I used to have. And I was
Yeah.
just like, right, if there's any time to do it, it's going to be now. Like, clean slate, time to start again.
Yeah.
And when I rang my parents, I'm like, oh, I'm going to start a treats business. They're like, oh, what? I'm like, yep, I've quit. I've quit
Yep.
Woolies.
Chartered
And
accountants out. Treats businesses in.
yeah, that's right. And they're like, rightio, okay. I'd always been pretty, like, I was so busy at school and stuff, that I'd never done any baking or food making at home. So like when I told them I was going to have to start a food business, everyone's like, do you know how to turn on the oven? I'm like, I figured it out. And I'll work this out. And so, yeah, we started it as a market stall in Townsville. We were new here.
Wow.
There was nothing around. We didn't know how much interest there would be. But we were really fortunate that, Townsville is such a community-oriented place. It only has 300,000 people. It's a small place. And so all the businesses know each other, and everyone really bands together, especially because we're so removed from the rest of the kind of business community of Australia.
Yeah.
And everyone's kind of fighting all the same issues to get growth, that they really support each other. And everyone came out in droves to help us. And within a few weeks, one of the big food markets here invited us to stock our treats in their shop, and that was such a blessing for us. We were so grateful for that start. And then the word of mouth spread, and we ended up stocking our treats in about 40 different places throughout North Queensland.
Wow.
And developing our range, and building our own commercial kitchen, and getting doing all the things.
Do you send orders long distance?
Until February this year, we did. We sent them all over Australia.
And you've stopped.
We
Damn
have
it.
stopped. We started our business in 2013 and operated at full steam, working 24/7 for about 8 years.
Yep.
And absolutely loved it. Went through so many different stages of running a cafe alongside the business, stocking all over the country, supplying all over the country, running our own workshops online and in person, like just doing a lot of things whilst raising this little person.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, like for so many other small businesses, COVID was pretty rough.
Yes.
All of our hospitality customers, particularly up here in North Queensland, were virtually, a lot of them closed.
Yeah,
many of them were cut just alive and ordering the bare minimum. And that meant for us really cutting back. We had a team of 7 or 8 people in the business, and we had to cut right back. And eventually, to to myself last year with my mum's assistance, and just to make it through, to get through the COVID pressure. And I did, after the first 2 years, I did it for another year, but then just realized that it was just getting harder and harder and harder, and no one could see when the end was going to be. And I was looking at my 5-year-old and thinking, I am not getting enough quality time with you, and you are the reason why we do this.
Yes, isn't that such a difficult thing? I've got trying to balance work and kids just basically being the concept. I've got my 5-year-old sleeping in my bed at the moment, because that last half an hour of the day and the first half an hour of the morning I can just spend with her, because there's just so much other stuff happening all the time, and I constantly got that feeling that I don't get enough quality time, and it's so hard. I think everyone who has kids and works experiences that.
Absolutely. It's so hard. Well, in the end, we just decided, because we couldn't see when it was going to end, when things were going to get easier for hospitality serving businesses, that we decided to close the treats part of our business and just maintain the production of our chocolate hazelnut spread. So
you've got your own chocolate hazelnut spread?
Yes.
What's the name? Because I'm buying Panna currently, and I have to sparingly eat it because it's got sugar in it.
Yeah, I mean, Panna's done great with their product in that it's, it's vegan and gluten-free and obviously dairy-free and pretty natural, but it is 56% sugar.
Yes, it's like Nutella in that respect. So I'm like, I like to look at it, isn't this embarrassing? Okay. I buy things to look at them.
I'm impressed that you can just look at them. I can't.
I've still got mint Panna. It's gone. They don't even make it anymore.
Well, you exercise a lot more control than me. That's probably also why I had to close the treats business, because I probably ate half the treats.
What's your one called?
It's called Heavenly Hazel.
And where's it stocked?
Well, we did have it stocked all over. We've just pressed pause on it while we move the production up to a facility in Cairns, and then I'll set about finding a distributor and stockists again. At the moment, you can buy it through our website.
I'll start requesting it from everywhere that I buy my whole food stuff.
Thank you, nourishingbites.com.au. But I like Panna. We love the taste of chocolate hazelnut. I grew up loving Ferrero Rocher. In my Christmas stocking, that would be the thing that I got, a box of those, and they'd be gone, 16 of them by 9 o'clock. That flavor combination to me is just irresistible.
It was the chocolate of the 80s, really, wasn't it?
It was, and I stopped it a long time ago. And when we were creating different treats for Nourishing Bites, a lot of the inspiration came from childhood favorites that I wanted to recreate in a much more wholesome version, as a much more wholesome version. And that's why I created a Ferrero to begin with, that had a chocolate hazelnut truffle that had this center in it, fudgy center. And then one day a customer said to me, "Oh gosh, I love what's in the middle of that so much. I could eat it all day." And I was like, "Well, you could. I could put that in a jar and sell it just as it is." And that was a breakthrough for us, because until then all of our treats needed to be refrigerated, and they're all handcrafted. So sending small orders to individuals was easy with Star Trek and packaging and padding, but sending big lots to wholesale customers, long distances, was really hard, because refrigerated freight is very expensive, and also things get thrown around a lot. And so the product didn't always survive. Whereas this hazelnut spread, it doesn't need to be refrigerated in transport. It's in a jar, so as long as you bubble wrap it, it's great. So we started that a number of years ago, and then we've had a grant from the government, a Deadly Deals grant. We're actually also, it's our shared business. We identify as an Indigenous business. Because a part of our vision is also to not only support women and guys generally in Australia who are looking to, make better life choices, but as you would be aware, diabetes and diabetes-related illnesses is an epidemic generally.
Disproportionate health outcomes in Indigenous Australians.
Absolutely, and by creating healthier versions of, well-loved treats, we're aiming to support our Indigenous family and community to improve their health as well. And so on the back of that, we won a Deadly Deals grant, which is for Indigenous businesses to, build a commercially sustainable business, and they could see the value and potential in Heavenly Hazel. and have supported that, and also encouraged us to create versions of Heavenly Hazel that include Indigenous natives. So that's also what we started including in our treats.
Yum.
And in hazel. So we've got like a rosella and raspberry Heavenly Hazel and a finger lime, and we've got plans for lots of others.
Oh, that's so cool.
So we can showcase the ingredients and because they're superfoods in their own right, as well as being delicious and different. And also that way we can support Indigenous growers to build a sustainable agricultural industry.
Yeah.
So that's part of our mission as well.
I love your brain, Shelley. You have great ideas. You have really great ideas. So that's pretty much taking you up to now. And how else did COVID affect your family as well, other than how it affected your business?
Well, I guess that was at the centre of it, because we were fortunate in North Queensland that we weren't subject to really long, extended, difficult lockdowns like Melbourne and Sydney were. So we weren't affected in that way. And in fact, we just like worked hard all the way through it. But that, I guess, in itself was hard, because when PJ had to come out of kindy because there were lockdowns, like the only thing I could do was have him in our kitchen. And so we spent like 3 months, you know, with me and a couple of people, like sitting there trying to entertain himself as a 4-year-old in our kitchen, and trying to juggle like working 12 hours a day, trying to keep everything going and look after him.
Oh, don't touch this, don't touch the oven, put that down.
And there's so much, you know, big commercial equipment, and like I'd try to play with him and engage him in everything, but at the same time we had to get a lot done, and I didn't want him to hurt himself. So, you know, we had to rely on those computers and the iPad a fair bit, which I'm not that keen on, but it was a necessary evil, I guess, in those circumstances.
Yeah.
And, you know, it was hard because he wanted to be with me. I wanted to be with him. And that's like doing that for as long as we did was a big contributor to why we decided to let it go.
And so what are you doing since that? So it's the Heavenly Hazel at the moment and the growth of that particular line.
Yeah. So we're working on that. There's an incubator in Cairns that works with small businesses like ours. They've got a factory set up so that you can actually produce, still not big in terms of big companies, but big for a small business. You can produce like 1,000 kilos of Heavenly Hazel in a day instead of doing like 10 kilo runs one after the other in our kitchen.
It's amazing, isn't it? Some of that commercial equipment.
It's incredible, and something that we wouldn't have access to if we didn't have the support of an organisation like that and the Queensland government, which has been amazing to us. And so we're working through the process of transitioning our production over, because you can't, because it's totally different equipment. Like you can't just make it the same way and do things the same way. Like it's all different, and everything has to be redesigned, from the recipe to the method to the way you label things to everything. So we're just working through that process.
You've got those machines putting the labels on and all that, is it?
That's what we're working towards. Whereas we were putting them on by ourselves, but it all has to be redesigned to fit with the machines, and so it's a big process.
Challenge.
But the other thing I've taken on this year, because we missed out on so much time,
because you didn't have enough on your plate. Yeah.
Well, I'm homeschooling PJ.
Of course you are.
Which was a big undertaking. It's something we're loving together. I mean, it's not easy for either of us, but we missed so much time in the last couple of years. I mean, we were with each other, you know, we were physically with each other a lot, but not having that quality time and
connection.
Exactly.
It's like that when little kids play side by side, but they're doing their own thing. It's how often I feel as a parent, and I hate it. You know, I just want to connect with my child and be doing something together.
Absolutely. And I just realized, I was like, oh my gosh, he was 3 last time I looked, and now he's 6, and I don't want to miss any more time. And so, we made the decision as a family for us to homeschool together at least this year, and we'll see how we go.
Yeah.
Going forward. But that's what we're doing, which, and it's surprisingly developed in the sense that there's such a strong homeschool community across Australia and also in Townsville. Like,
it's changed a lot.
It has. So many people are making the choice for various reasons to homeschool, whether it be nerves about COVID or dealing with specific like learning difficulties or behavioural issues or concerns with the schooling system.
Yeah.
So many families have come to it, which is great, because there's enough people now that there's a lot of organised activities. Like
it's a community. It's a real community. But is there anything you would like to add?
Not really. I'm just fascinated to hear about everyone else's journeys when they all come online. Like it's been so long, and I'm sure, you know, I never expected that this was going to be my path. If someone had told me this was my path in 95, I would have fallen over. And I'm sure it's been the same for everyone else. And I'm just fascinated to hear, you know, the twists and turns that everyone's taken.
Thanks so much, Shelley. I was really looking forward to and enjoyed this recording. See you in a couple of years, hopefully, at the reunion.